Hello, and welcome back to Parlay. I'm Zandy, I'll be your host for this one. This is a prompt written by True Parley Grandmaster Foot about NieR Automata and the end of art. Mr. Foot begins. How does one start a parlay request? I have submitted parlay requests that took less than a minute to write, but sometimes asking a question seems harder than answering it. In the case of this parlay, I've been working on this on and off for the last 4 years. Perhaps I've been working on this since before I even had parlay. So before we start with the actual request, I'd like to talk about why it's so hard to talk about my favorite game and what I consider to be one of the most impressive artistic achievements in recent history. My goal here is not to convince you that NieR Automata is the greatest game of all time. I don't particularly care if you enjoyed or hated NieR or if there was X game that did it better. My goal here is to attempt to explain why one would consider this to be the greatest game of all time. Oh, and spoilers for all of NieR Automata. This is one of the very few games that I would hate to spoil for anyone. Please do not continue if you haven't played it. And I would like to pause here as well. This parlay that you're listening to right now is not the rest of the NieR Automata parlay that I just read you the opening paragraph of. I asked Mr. Foot for permission to make the proper NieR Automata parlay that we just read the beginning of into an unlisted separate video. Now that video is linked in this video's description, but I would like to ask you alongside Mr. Foot to please not watch that unless you have played through NieR Automata. What I've done for you is made, well, this parlay video, which isn't something Mr. Foot prompted. I'm going to talk a little bit about getting spoiled on games, recommending people avoid spoilers for games, and finding games you might like to play. Something I hope you'll find interesting, and of course is meant to be ironically topical if you are hopefully listening to my advice. What I've tried to do is make it easy for you because this default parlay isn't the rest of that one. You don't have to do anything to avoid getting spoiled. If you go out of your way to pause this and go click on that, you are going out of your way to ruin what might be a very enjoyable creative experience for you. And I just ask that you please don't do that. I think that they made something really cool and I want you to enjoy it. It doesn't really affect me at all. I just think you might like it. Like, please just listen to this. I hope you'll have a good time. Is that okay? Is that cool? Thank you. I assume that you stayed on the video. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I hope you'll save that too. If you do play NieR Automata at some point, or there's another possibility we'll get to later, well, then it's a little like book club at the end. After you finish ending E, once you've played endings A through E of NieR Automata, it'll make sense once you play NieR Automata. You will probably have some feelings, and you can use that pretty long parlay. It's a feature-length, movie-length parlay. It's very long to continue thinking about those things. And I think you'll really enjoy that, but I'm not sure it's even of much value to people that haven't played it yet. There is some game design homework there, but you'll see that in my other work. You know me in these parlay, if you've watched any of these before. If I make any conclusions in that parlay about game design, you're going to see it. It's going to be all over the other things I make, so there's no need for that. Instead, welcome. We'll take this off and pop a squat for a sec. Get comfy. We get to do whatever I want, basically. I said I was going to do another parlay as a sort of, not decoy, but, a consolation so that people have something to listen to. So it's easy for you not to go listen to that one and you don't feel left out. And that's going to be the beginning of my discussion today, which can about whatever I want. It's going to be about not spoiling yourself on things. I want to talk about two parties in this parlay. The recommender, trying to encourage people to play a certain thing or maybe not spoil themselves on a certain thing, and the audience, usually you, playing the thing. How you can have a better experience engaging with these pieces of media, and, also absolutely deciding when to listen when people say, I don't think you'd want to be spoiled on this. We have limited time in the world. For this parlay, for example, well, not this one, but the one in the description, Mr. Food had given me a heads up almost a year ago, saying the climax of the Invisible Wall game design series is going to be about NieR Automata, and I think you would like to have played through it without having been spoiled on that experience. So I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place, Mr. Food is. I don't want to encourage you to play it too much because you say you have very, very limited time. I've had a terrible and very busy, 8 months to a year. But if you want to engage in the parlay, you might have to just look up or get spoiled on all these things about the game. And I think you'd be happy if you experienced them without having done that. And in this case, Mr. Food, you were absolutely right. But I rarely take that advice. I rarely listen when someone says that because I think it's usually overblown. I think usually they're overreacting. And having rarely taken that advice and often kind of jumped in and experienced the thing in a non-linear, not the way it was trying to present itself. I looked it up on the wiki or whatever. I want to say that I think I was usually correct. I think people are usually overreacting when they say you can't possibly understand without experiencing it yourself. We might come back to me more later. I think that that's more true for me than it would be for some people. After all, my career is to think about and discuss these subjects. So it's, I think, easier for me to imagine maybe that perspective or this one when my entire Pantaloon Saloon channel here is just me doing infinite mental jumping jacks to become the god of Q&A or something. I don't know. What is this channel even in 2024? But I definitely relate if people feel like, well, but people say, oh, you don't want to be spoiled about everything. And people can be babies. I bet some of you are thinking about that. They can be a bit silly about, oh no, what if you get spoiled? About everything. And is that really sensible? Sure, fine, no. If that's what you want me to say. Yeah, I agree with you, actually. I think this is a game where it is sensible. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why I listened to Mr. Food's recommendation, and then a little bit about some, I guess, suggestions or just some thoughts about if you're going to recommend games to people or recommend they go into a game unspoiled. Or for you as an audience member, you just want to play games, you want to take recommendations, but effectively listen to them when it's beneficial to, and not overreact to them every single time, and also find games yourself to enjoy more. Does that sound cool? I want to talk about this. I mean, it's my parlay idea, so sure I do. Cool, so that's what we're going to do. So first, let's do an example. I guess we will talk about me a little bit more, because I want to give you the example with Mr. Fu. Why did I listen in this case? I thought about not listening. I was very worried for a specific reason I'm not, I guess, super proud of, but this is what it was. I I kind of didn't want to get my hopes up. I guess that's how I felt, really. So what happened for in this case is that Mr. Food has made a over a year long series of these invisible wall parlay. Now let's get out of the way any idea that I feel like financially I ought to give Mr. Food the benefit of the doubt. First of all, Mr. Food is already one of the longest time and therefore highest paying in terms of total money that my business has gotten people who has ever graced this channel. I've really enjoyed these parlay, and I have well and truly done the business with you, Mr. Food. Like I don't need to retain every single request from every single audience member. Furthermore, there's the separate point I will and have made ad nauseum that it just isn't an efficient way to make money to do that. I'm doing this because I like it, principally. I have to make money, but I want to do the thing. So if I didn't want to, I have every faith that Mr. Food would have respected that and just done the parlay. It would have been fine. So it's not about that. Furthermore, I mean, I owned NieR Automata, so it's also not about it like being too much money or something. If you bought it as a full price game, which I think I did, NieR Automata, in fact, sat in my library for 8 years. I think 8 years anyway. I got it when I graduated college, never even installed it or booted it, and waited 8 years without consuming any media about it, without ever hearing or watching or seeing anything about it. without even thinking about playing it, really. I don't know why I bought it, actually. And that's pretty rare for me. I not only usually don't like wait that long before playing a game. I usually wait a while, but not that long. I'm usually pretty active looking for these things. I also usually don't buy something soon-ish to when it releases. Although I think it's was longer than 8 years. I had still waited a little while before getting it. It was probably on sale or something. But it's unusual for me to buy a game so long before I played it. I think part of it is because I had designs to really enjoy it. I had heard of reviews at the time where reviewers I had enjoyed had really gotten an impression of the game. They felt like it was something special. And I had a much vaguer idea of that at the time, but I thought I would maybe respect that. Why not? And we will get back to those topics later as I recommend approaches to being an audience member and deciding what to play and when. Suffice it to say, there was really no motivation one way or another. Now, I mean, you would have to play the whole thing. You know, I didn't know exactly how long it would be, but you can look such things up, and it said 20 to 30 hours for endings A through E. I would say that was accurate. I definitely took my time at one specific point when playing NieR Automata, and my Steam page that I'm looking at right now says that I took exactly 30 hours to play through endings A through E. The instant I finished ending E, foreshadowing in the distance, I closed the game, and that is how long it took. So, for what it's worth, I think that was pretty accurate. It can be a reasonably linear experience, so I do think that that's going to be consistent for a lot of people. But why did I play it at Mr. Foot's request? This was a pretty busy part of my life the past year. It wasn't great overall. Why did I still choose to play it? That came at a significant time, logistical cost to me. Why did I do that? Okay, so one of the reasons is that the whole Invisible Wall series had come up before. Context. For example, the entire series is based on a concept by Yoko Taro, the director for NieR Automata, or whatever his title would be on the project, about the idea of the invisible wall. If you're not familiar, this entire series is about this concept that there are games that are made, games that could physically be made but are often not, and then games that you just can't easily make. And in that void between games that can't be made and games that are made, there are games that can be made but are frequently not made, past what we call the invisible wall. There's no reason you can't go make them in terms of like physical reality, but there are other human reasons why people often don't. They can be moral reasons. They might be logistical reasons it's possible to make, but it's incredibly inconvenient to make. Maybe we could say it that way. And I can give you a few examples. It doesn't have to be just games either. For example, one piece we watched was a reality TV tangential series where the director being involved in the series to such an extent and simulating upcoming moments of anxiety for clients, I'm trying to make it vague, to such an extent, caused potentially actual real life harm mentally to himself and the staff. You're left to decide for yourself as you watch the show. You can only assume that that is part of the production, that it's acting, that it's not real, but how would you know? In the world of the show, it's not acting. It's real harm, real distress that the characters or people in the show experience. Was that an okay thing to make? And even if you consider it to all be an act, if you think about making a show like that again, it's easy to imagine, yeah, that could really distress people involved in that production. There's a reason people normally don't make that. Is it worth going that far for art? For what? And we will, at the end of this parlay, address the elephant in the room, which is what is so worth it about not being spoiled? What's so good about experiencing these pieces of media in this way? What's so worth it about art? What was so worth it about making them in that way? I will get to that later. The whole topic of the entire series is by the person who directed the game that Mr. Foot is telling me to go in blind, right? So that, yeah, that helps, sure. There's a specific recommendation in terms of design ideas that you, Mr. Food, had in mind when you recommended the game. You're not just saying, I thought it was cool. That means absolutely nothing to me at this point. We'll get to that a little later, too. You're recommending it for a rather specific reason. You think that it does something unique with its design. It is an endeavor with a goal that is unusual among pieces of media. That's a pretty good recommendation. That's a pretty specific reason to play it, sure. Furthermore, you gave me other recommendations, softer recommendations, throughout the series. And I'll give some credit to myself here. What I took the time to do throughout those recommendations was carefully choose within reason to invest in a few of them so that I could see if I was likely to be disappointed if I took your other recommendations. Now, Mr. Fruit, you've recommended a lot of things to me over the years, actually. You're probably the person who's recommended the most games and pieces of media to me over the time that you've been a patron, which I appreciate a lot because I enjoyed a lot of them, or I found even the ones I didn't enjoy usually useful. In my video footage folder that is open right now as I'm recording this, I can see Post Void, a game that I believe you recommended, which I didn't really like as per se, but it was sure a useful example. It's a useful example of a lot of things, and it's real tight, it's real small. You can experience it very fast. Like 10 minutes is almost, I would say, adequate to have gotten the idea of the game's design. Though there's more to find, of course. You know, it's not that it's a short game as per se. It's just it's a very smart recommendation. It gives you a unique experience in an incredibly efficient, like time-wise package. Other things like the beginner's guide that, you know, it's not like that, but it's an hour and a half long linear walking simulator story. You know, you have someone talking to you and it's an experience that's an hour and a half. That's experienceable even with a pretty busy schedule. You see what I mean? So I had had chances along the way. You had offered me, Mr. Fu, you get credit too, chances to decide if I thought it was good to invest my attention into these things, to take your word for it. You particularly, not just some random person recommending things. This is Mr. Foot specifically. Is Mr. Foot specifically someone who I think is using their ability to say, hey, this is the one I don't want you to get spoiled on? Are they using that power carefully? And I determined that you were, that in many of these cases, you were taking the time to recommend things that are not just a frivolous, you are interested in the thing, or when you do recommend those things, you say that they're that kind of thing. And when you feel like something truly has a unique piece of design, you say so, and encourage me not to go into it knowing what that thing is, to go in and have the experience cleanly. I felt like you had described and demonstrated that you would do that. You are not just any person recommending things, you're you. And so I'm willing to listen in a way I shouldn't be willing to listen. Not just wouldn't be willing to, but there is every logical reason not to be willing to listen if some random person were to recommend it. I don't know that that random person has standards, not to be rude. I don't have time in the busy lives that we now live to just decide that every single person has good perspective on what would be a meaningful experience. They don't. So I'm not going to listen to that. And I'm not recommending, as we transition into advice, just some thoughts about how you might do this yourself. I'm not recommending that you at all behave that way either. I'm recommending that you simply think about the individual recommending the thing. Use your experiences with them and the games you play together to calibrate your understanding of their recommendations, and then and only then make an informed decision about whether it makes sense to listen to their urging or recommendation to go into a game unspoiled, wait on a game, whatever. This makes your life much more fun. Of course, I don't want to get too far away from that grounding principle of basically any advice, if that's what it is that I would give anyone. The reason to do this is you will be happier, quite directly. You will spend your limited time on this goddamn earth much happier, playing things that are more targeted to your interests for reasons that you can actually enjoy talking about with those other people, having experiences that are new when you want them to be, or comforting when you would enjoy them to be. at the right times, rather than just being pulled along by the whimsy of this freaking industry, which will definitely lead you astray. It will lead you places, oh sure, but places you want to go, oh, not reliably, no. And so we get into that second part of the parlay that I described before. Having described to you how I decided whether or not to take Mr. Foot's recommendation urging that I ought to play NieR Automata, for me a 30-hour experience, a very significant investment of time, an entire standard light work week for some people, in the middle of a busy schedule, I believe I took that recommendation quite wisely, and it ended up paying off. And you can do this too. You perhaps ought to do this too. It's not that hard to do. You don't have to do anything else in your leisure time. It's fun in a way. And I'll tell you, it also makes people in your life feel pretty appreciated, pretty like they're giving you specific recommendations. I'll tell you, if I were to recommend something to you and you were to say no, and you were to explain that it's because you don't think you like builds as I've described them, and you think I would recommend games that have involved build systems, and then I get to say, yeah, in this case, I am just saying I like the build system, and I guess you're saying you don't like that or you don't want that right now. Fair enough. Me personally, I would feel listened to. I would feel like, wow, you respected and listened to what I had to say. You chose not to do it, but you thought about what I was recommending. Fine. If you're not going to enjoy it, I don't want you to play it. I want someone to talk about it with, maybe selfishly, I want you to play it. But if you have a good reason why you think you won't enjoy playing it, I'm not going to enjoy talking to you about it. So don't play it. If you're on the same side and you have good friends, they will be happy even to hear you ignore a recommendation of theirs if you're not ignoring the recommending itself. So I think it's a great thing to do. You can have really beautiful friendships and camaradeliness, colleaguery. Is that all words are made up? Whatever it is that Mr. Foot and I are, colleagues, I would say. You can have good both friendships and cooperation with colleagues better when you do this. So what do you do? What would I do? I mean, I'm not an expert on this either, but here's just some thoughts. Let's think about it a little. So first, I want to talk about the audience, and this will be more of a direct parallel to what I just described having experienced with Mr. Foot's recommendation. Well, what did I do? Well, I spent my time getting their recommendations to calibrate, what I thought. You're going to have to sacrifice some amount of time taking a calculated risk on this chance. You're close to people that you're close to for some reason. I've attracted Mr. Foot by talking about game design constantly, endlessly, for hours and hours on the internet into a camera, just like I am now. So there's a better than average chance already that they are interested in things kind of similar to me. Now, they still might not be, sure. Your friends and you, well, you're close for some reason. I think in many cases, people are surprisingly dissimilar to the people they're friends with. That's not necessarily what makes people fun to spend time with, them being similar. But I think there's still a good chance that they know something about your tastes and will recommend things that are at least a little bit on target for you to enjoy. Among those things, pick something that is not too long to experience and try it. Just accept that you need to dip your feet in somewhere, and hey, instead of getting marketed to by Mountain Duty and deciding that's what you want to play, instead play something your friend recommended. You're certainly more likely to enjoy it than the thing that's being marketed to you, so it's not much of a risk. And hey, I'm sure they'll really appreciate that you listened to the things that they really like, and it might be fun. You get to delve into sort of something from their perspective. Of course, I would love it if people were willing to not pass judgment after just that example, but yeah, I mean, you can talk with your people about this. Try to calibrate your experience together with them and use it as a way to understand what they're trying to do when they pick games and what they want from a game. Be aware, of course, that you and they may both not know that right away. I definitely didn't know what I enjoyed about the games that I play. This entire channel came about because I didn't realize that what I had been enjoying about Warframe and Guild Wars 2 and World of Warcraft isn't good at giving you build options, but that is what I wanted it to be good at, I realized. I started this channel and my other two and everything I'm doing for a career right now because somebody very close to me, my current partner, made me realize that that was what I liked about all those things. And in fact, that's really unexplored. And that's where this came from. I didn't know either. I didn't magically know the thing that I really wanted. None of us do. You have to go on a journey and find it out. And it's kind of fun. You get to go on an adventure and find out what you enjoy. You do not have to put pen to paper and write, or in this case, converse with your friends, knowing what it is. You don't have to give a parlay. You don't have to do this. This is my job, not Mr. Food or anyone else's job. Although you're making me look put to shame. I mean, Mr. Food, you're doing a pretty darn good job organizing it, sure. But you don't have to. You can absolutely just find out what you like. Change your mind along the way. Say, I don't know, I guess I enjoy, what do you think I like in games? That can be surprisingly insightful. So that's one thing. It can be a way to build community. And that's good because point number 2 would be not engaging in social spaces that constantly play every new thing right when it comes out. Having your own recommendations is really valuable, and here I'm aware that I'm very spoiled. It's not just Mr. Food that gives me very targeted game recommendations. Laser, satellite targeted game recommendations, the likes of which nobody can ever have. Sorry, I wish you could, but you probably can't. I spent a huge amount of time and effort, and so did a lot of you, to give me these unparalleled game recommendations, and I know other people don't have that. But I wanted those from the beginning. That's part of why I did this. So I do still have some thoughts about how you can find those recommendations. The first step, again, I was saying there's kind of two halves here, is not sitting around on the Reddit or IGN or whatever, waiting for the new releases to come out. They will not take care to carefully present them. They're going to try to rush through everything and show as many things as possible early. I've been pretty impressed by how some Reddit subreddits will make an effort to manage spoilers, but it's often an uphill battle. Twitter and etc. I propose that these spaces are largely not valuable to begin with. They are a way for people who are at the very beginning of their journey of discovering what they like to find some games and to draw some basic discrepancies or differences between them to get you started. They are not useful if you are a person who is listening to Parley. You already put too much effort into the things you're doing with your life for it to be useful to use those services. They're just not offering anything at that point. So I would strongly encourage you to consider getting recommendations elsewhere. The next step, I guess, would be like an independent reviewer. So this would be like a YouTuber that does reviews in a style you like. Maybe they carefully avoid spoilers in a way you enjoy. They like games similar to what you like. But I would recommend going a step further or sideways and instead pursuing creators who talk about game design essayists. Me, I guess, on the Zandypants channel. And another example would be Mark Brown from Game Maker's Toolkit. These videos use little bits of individual games as examples of specific design, and what this does is mean that when a game is shown to you, it's shown to you always with the reason attached to that thing. Opportunity cost, a video I recently made about opportunity cost, build system basics, opportunity cost. Well, each of the videos in the game, each of the games in the video is specifically placed in the video because I have something to say about how that game does opportunity cost. Think this subject is cool, as I described it in the intro? Well, Pyre does it very well. You might not like other things about Pyre, and I would recommend getting a general gist of what is available in Pyre, maybe the very beginning of a very simple review, a traditional review, before you play it. But if you like opportunity cost, maybe I would be listening if Pyre shows up and has beautiful opportunity cost. Likewise, Warframe, well, it does a lot of build system things a lot, but not opportunity cost, so you might not like that as much. The recommendations are very specific, and there's a little added bonus. Because these videos are using the game for that specific example, well, we only show that one part of the game. The rest of it's not relevant. I'm not going to spoil you on the story of Pyre or Warframe because it's irrelevant to the topic of the video. So it usually makes it pretty easy to avoid spoilers. And because there are usually so many examples of this kind of thing, creators usually have no difficulty simply avoiding the corner case where it would be a spoiler. So, yeah, I think you'd find that that would be very helpful. If you find a topic that you find interesting in game design and look at the videos that are about that topic, examine the games that are being used in those videos, you may be able to find a very specific form of a thing that you like in game design to enjoy. After all, people like things about FPS games, RPG games, not just the mere idea of a first person game that has shooting. Those can be so varied as to be almost non existent in terms of a united genre. So, of course, what you actually like are perhaps the mechanics underneath. And so, a way of getting recommendations where you actually only focus on the mechanics underneath can be very effective. I've gotten a lot of the games that I enjoy the most from recommendations not from you folks have been from Game Maker's Toolkit video examples. That is a place I get some recommendations. And there are a few reviewers that I watch for perspective. I find it very helpful to try to find pairs of reviewers that often disagree, but still explain why they think the thing that they think, because it often gives you the other side of the perspective with just less mental load. You can imagine that maybe it would be different yourself, but that can be tiring. That's okay. It's nice to hear, I liked this because blank, I disliked this because blank. And then decide, well, why did they like it or dislike it? What might be closer to how I feel? I guess a related topic I'm not really prepared to tackle in this parlay is what makes a game good or bad. I would just like to suggest that that isn't very helpful when concluding what games you would enjoy, and that a lot of games, in terms of production value, are rather high quality experiences. And so it's really not usually going to be that the presentation is so ugly, but the game is like amazing otherwise, that you won't enjoy the game. I'm not saying that's irrelevant. I just think in many cases, if your standards are very high, that's not going to be the thing you're going to have trouble finding. And for most people, the issue is more that their standards are not very high. They're willing to get something recommended pretty easily. They're not asking for something specific. If you ask for specific things, it's hard to achieve specific things well. And I think you'll find that the games that do those specific things will have lovely, often, presentation, or at least cool, interesting. So that's one thing. Now, I had started this by saying, well, that means that you maybe need to move away from those social spaces. I think the number one reason that people do not avoid a spoiler when it's coming in is because they just want to keep watching the video. Okay, but the number two reason, I've gotten rid of that one. The number two reason, if people are going to watch the NieR Automata parlay that I linked in the description that's unlisted, that I tried to get you to avoid by making this parlay, if they're going to watch it, it's going to be this reason most of all, in my opinion. It's going to be because they want to be part of the conversation, and they feel like their social outlet is being dampened or removed by waiting to experience a thing. Now, it might seem to, for this parlay, I mean, okay, it's going to have a very small audience, but I'm sure this will make more sense when I talk about new games releasing. Everyone's talking about, I don't follow any of these games, so I don't really know, like The Last of Us 2 or something. And if you don't play it right when it comes out, you don't get to be part of the conversation about that. But while I can't make all of your social circle stop playing games right when they release, there are a lot of reasons why it's bad to do that. You pay the most money, substantially more money, for many of these games to play them in their worst technical state, where they are assuredly not done and bug fixed, because the games industry in 2024, I guess. I don't know. You're probably going to have any twist of the story or game mechanic innovation or inversion, any surprise, any of the little delights that make life worth living spoiled out of the game because people won't be able to shut up about every single tiny aspect of it. This is not enjoying an experience. This robs many of these pieces of a lot of their value for no gain toward you. In fact, you directly pay money and some of your time, because it's harder to get through the game if it's not as bug fixed a lot of the time, for the benefit, the apparent benefit of getting to have a social experience about the game. I can't give you advice in this video that will make all of the people in your life not play new things as they come out. All I can say is there are so many almost objective benefits to not playing games right when they release. So I guess I have to leave it to you. I'll acknowledge in this moment that there are some games where there is kind of a positive to playing it when it goes live. The player base is populated, you know. It's kind of outside the scope of this video, but I do want to say that I think to some extent it's not true that the game is really dead, as people are saying it's dead all the time. It has some players. The player is concerned when they're saying it's dead that it's not popular, that there isn't a conversation around it, a community they want to inhabit. If you want to play the game, it's usually an overreaction. You usually can. Ranked modes notwithstanding, that can require a larger player count, yes. It's okay to want a social outlet. And yes, it does remove that to some extent if you don't play things kind of soon after they come out. I would like to suggest, however, that you would find yourself surprised were you to wait a month. Not 8 years, like me with NieR Automata, a month. People don't have that much free time to play games. Many of these games will keep the player engaged for a few months at least. If a game has so few players that you literally actually cannot queue up for multiplayer, 1 month after it came out, that game is bad. That universally panned, that nobody stuck with it, literally nobody, not just not most people, not it's not as popular now, literally actually not enough people to boot the game with a full match of players. The game is almost certainly just not good. People don't agree, even if maybe sometimes it feels like they ought to, about what is good in games. So if a game truly cannot be booted, it is almost always just bad or very, very old. And if it's very old but not that bad, you often can find niche communities where you can play it. So yes, I'm coming down the strongest on this point. I really feel like there is no argument for playing games literally right when they release. It is almost always better in absolutely every possible way to play them like 1 month after they release. And if that's a problem in these games, either because you feel left behind from your friends or the community, the content has moved on, or because the game isn't populated, you know what? I think those games are just a little bit shitty then. And it's okay to say, but I think that's a bad thing about the game. And if people turn around and say, well, it's because you came to the party late, no, like that is still a criticism of the game. It is okay to dislike that about games. You perhaps ought to. I rest my case. All I can do is fuel the fire were you to influence your fellows to go about this another way. However, if you took the advice earlier in the video about having a conversation with what kind of games, your friends would enjoy, it's possible that this will one thing lead to another, eventually get you to the point where you're preoccupied enough playing games you all like and want to talk about that you won't have this problem. And indeed, I do have friends who really follow those market trends that I'm coming down so hard on, but actually just don't have time to play them right away. And as a result, I get to get in there quicker with a better, more specific, shorter recommendation that's cheaper. And indeed, these friends have tended to enjoy those games. I have a friend who is sitting on a whole pile of big AAA releases that they don't have time to play, but bought right away due to the marketing cycle for the game. No offense, friend of mine, who shall remain nameless. I'm not saying they're going to be bad games. I'm just saying I feel like it didn't totally make sense to buy them right away. You know you're going to play them, but you have a big backlog. And this is common. It's okay to have this problem. Our lives are busy, fine. But I've been able to get in there with a few games that we can play right now and you can have a good time. And because my recommendations are so much more streamlined, this friend, to their credit, has played these games and we've had an amazing time playing them together. The Finals, Rabbit and Steel, Mosalina, these are multiplayer experiences, doesn't have to be only multiplayer, that I've been able to sneak in there for very little time and money in my friend's schedule, enough that even though they couldn't play those games, they were willing to try these games. And to their credit, we all had a really good time. So this is absolutely something you can do. I'm not just saying all of my friends are in a meditation plane where I don't have to put any effort into this, but you should just magically change our entire society and make social interactions more healthy. Like, no, this is achievable by a normal person. I don't think you have to do anything that crazy. And of course, on my Discord server, if you connect to that, you will find my big list of games where I tag whether the game offers co-op. Lots of experiences that they might be a little focused on the things I like about games, yes, but lots of experiences that you can boot up and play with other people that, will allow you to play together. Things you could recommend fuel for the fire, if you will. If you do that enough, it is possible that your friend group or your social circle will stop being as focused on the initial releases. After all, they're not as fun, they're more expensive, they're more buggy, and they're too intense to play right on the spot. The proof is in the pudding. I don't have to argue for this as strongly as I am, because if you try it, you will just see that it is better, unless it's not for your individual situation. If you're having a great time playing releases right as they come out, I guess there's no problem. I just predict that there is for most people. But if there isn't, great. I mean, there is for me and most other people, I think. But the proof is in the pudding. You try it. If it makes you happy or good. If it doesn't, working as intended. Do what makes you happy. I do want to talk a little bit about being a recommender. I have less here, so I saved it for the end. But I still think it's interesting. We can do a little more as people saying, hey, don't get spoiled for this game. Hey, play this game, to make it more likely that people listen. Let's start by going back to what I recommended that the audience does, what I did when I took Mr. Foot's recommendation. Well, what did I do? I picked from the things they recommended and chose one or a few that were lighter offerings as like a test case. Now, if you're the recommender, well, you can exploit this, can't you? You can carefully choose to recommend, first of all, only things that you think are actually indicative of what you're trying to recommend. Don't recommend everything you like. You have taste. Your taste is not things that are objectively good. It's things that you specifically like. Acknowledging this, you will find that some things make sense to recommend and others don't. You can start by just sharing a game that you like with a friend. Just have them look at a part of it for a few minutes, or say you want to show them a part of it, and just listen to how they react. Do they think it sounds cool? Do they think one part of it seems tedious? You can push a little bit. People like to talk about themselves, by and large, at least I've found, and mostly are not kind of exhausted of doing that after their workday, because I have this bizarre job. And so in many cases, I think you will have good luck. I've often had good luck getting even not very well-spoken people to say quite a bit about their thing that they like about games when pushed. It can seem pushy, and you can always back off if the person says like, well, why do you care? You just say, I'm just interested. I didn't mean to upset you. I just wanted to know what you thought. I was just thinking about games that you've enjoyed. That's all. But yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I would hope your friends are willing to have a little conversation about this. That could be enough to get you started. You can start calibrating, and then at least pick some games to recommend and other games not to recommend. You might even say, I think you might like this, I think you might not like this, when a game comes up in conversation. And then only when a game feels like a really strong candidate do you recommend it. You could even go further and try to include a few recommendations that are small, like really easy to get into, to sort of build confidence. I'm not really sure what the benefit here is to the recommender, as an aside. I want to get my friend from the example before with the AAA backlog, but then I recommended them stuff and they played it, that friend. I want to get that friend to take my recommendations. So I'm putting like a modest amount of effort into manipulating them, but I want them to have more fun. I mean, with me in some cases. But like they're doing that when I ask most of the time. But it's because I'm being careful with asking them. Like, why do I care about doing that? You know what I mean? I care about it more than it benefits me. I don't know. But the point is, if you are not recommending some things, you liked a thing, but you don't recommend it to the person, and there are other things that, you liked or didn't like, but you do recommend to them, I would say that's a good yardstick or a good thermometer for you are recommending a like smart amount of things. You're thinking about whether you should recommend things to them. Even better is if between multiple friends, you can get to the point where you don't recommend the same things to all those people. You don't recommend everything to anyone, and you don't recommend the same subset of things you like to every individual person. You treat them like individuals. I think people will see this and want to enjoy it. It's fun. It's cool to have a group of people that are specifically looking out for your interests. Like, It feels great. It's kind of a magical thing. Like that's just great. Furthermore, I think it's important to then take the further step of saying, hey, be really careful about spoilers for this game. To take that step very carefully. Again, I started this by saying that I think a lot of people are way too quick to say, you can't understand this without experiencing it for yourself. They probably can, but there are a few cases where I think I would make the argument that yeah, it's a lot easier to understand this if you experience it yourself, or there's a lot of value added if you experience it yourself. On paper, it's a lot different than it is in practice. NieR Automata is a really good example of that, for example, and that was a lot of examples. I think that if you're careful with saying that, you do not say, oh no, spoilers, every 5 seconds, and only say it, productively avoiding spoilers, doing an excellent job not spoiling people for no reason, but you don't insist and push on not spoiling people on a thing, except in the rare occasion that it feels truly worth it. I feel like, again, that's a good thermometer for doing the right amount of it, that people will listen to what you're saying. You're not crying wolf, you are saying it when it's worth saying. Again, I would use the thermometer from before. Are there games where there would be a benefit to not going in unspoiled, but you just give up on that one? Not everyone needs to appreciate everything in the perfect way. We have a lot of media. Most things that most pieces of art are trying to achieve, there are plenty of other examples of that being done very well elsewhere. It's not ideal, no, but it is not the end of the world. It is just not important enough to sacrifice the integrity of the thing you're recommending to make sure every little thing happens just so. It can be okay to just suggest experiencing a thing a certain way, but I think pushing hard on it is something to do very carefully, not to overuse, and thus you improve the impact when you actually do say it. You can even give yourself the credit. Say, I never tell you to avoid spoilers, but for this one, please try. I think you will have fun. I think it'll be fun to talk about in a way it won't if you spoil it yourself. For me, that has been very effective, both as I've done it and when other people, Mr. Fruit, have done it with me. And I think that that will work well if it's something that you put your mind to. Finally, of course, this parlay is a kind of weird example of my growing list of tech if you want people to not spoil themselves on something. Understand why people want to spoil themselves on things. Why do people want to flip to the end of the book? Why do people want to stay in communities they know will worsen their experience of a game right when it comes out? Why do they do that? Well, they don't want to feel left out. They don't want to miss out. They don't have time to read the whole book. They want to be part of the conversation. So counter that feeling if you want them to stop. Want people not to watch your NieR Automata parlay? Well, what they want to do is watch a parlay. So put a video in front of them that offers entertainment. That's what I tried to do here. I hope it worked. And make it take a little more effort to go get the other thing. Watch it if they want to. I make so many damn parlay, you don't need more to watch. It's perfectly fine for me to just make one and people just won't see it. Big deal. I'm perfectly at peace with the idea that the NieR Automata parlay will be watched by 10 people ever. It will take a huge amount of work and practically nobody will see it. I don't care. That's one of the glorious freedoms of being on this channel. I don't need anyone to find it. Mr. Food already paid for it, so we don't have to worry about that. I can just do whatever I want. And you can definitely do whatever you want because you're not a content creator. You're not an internet entertainer. You do not need to make fulfilling content. You can just have the things be there for who they want to be there for. So if you are talking about something that you don't want someone else in the group to be spoiled on, yeah, try to find a way to make them not feel left out, and they won't try to spoil themselves. They won't, there will be no motivation to do it. Obviously, it's something bad, right? They don't want to spoil themselves, so if they do it, there must be some greater thing. They want something even more than they don't want to be spoiled. Take that thing away or give it to them. They want to feel included more than they don't want to be spoiled. So just include them, find a way that doesn't involve spoiling to include them. and they probably won't spoil themselves. Why would they at that point? Fundamentally, I hope that this means people will enjoy the pieces where it's reasonable a lot better. I will actually quickly just list a few games where I have done these things to, or listened to advice to deliberately avoid spoilers. Some, I think, pretty famous examples. Deus Ex, the original Deus Ex. Outer Wilds, I've owned for close to as long as NieR Automata, 5 or 6 years, maybe. I don't know how long Outer Wilds has been out, so maybe it hasn't released that long. I got it soon after it released, and I have never booted it. Same thing as NieR Automata. And I've heard it's a game where there's a lot to reveal to the player. I have absolutely zero context or spoilers for that game by doing the things I said in this parlay. What else? What else we got? I'm just scrolling through a little bit to see if there are any other good examples, and there might not be. Inscription for a while. I have played that now, but for a year or two, Inscription was in that boat. Yep. I definitely think that was one that it was really fun to not know what I was getting into, but it's not important in the same way as NieR Automata. I feel like it was a really great surprise. It has something that goes a bit beyond being a plot twist. Not knowing the nature of the game does add something to Inscription. But I wouldn't say that it's quite as, not important, but I'm not sure it adds as much value to not know. I would definitely still play Inscription if you had the thing revealed. I would still play NieR Automata, but I think it does more damage? I don't know exactly. Um, what else we got? Not a lot of other things come to mind. So not that many, but just again a few examples. Outer Wilds is a really prominent example in my experience. I mean, I don't know because I haven't played it, but there you go. I also just wanted to say one more thing, and it's kind of silly. It's just a nice thing about verbiage. People tend to say, I can't believe you haven't played that. And think about the problem from before, right? People feel like they're being left out. To say it like it's so bad that you aren't part of this conversation, well, you're making them feel like they should rush through the experience, not for the experience itself, just to have a vapid conversation about it. Instead, saying, you're in for a treat. I mean, that is the actual situation. They're in for a treat. It's a game you think is really cool, and fortunately, they have it ahead of them. It's not bad that they haven't seen a cultural icon. Who the hell cares about cultural icons? Like, for what important conversation? Who cares? Like, it's not worthwhile to have a shallow conversation about these touchstone things that everyone can say, oh, I have my, Last of Us bad. No offense to The Last of Us, by the way. Again, I don't know what games people are talking about all the time. It's not probably not The Last of Us 2 right now. I'm sure it's a great game. It has nothing to do with that. You understand? It just like it doesn't matter to get your social badge of, oh, I did the thing everyone else did. That's bad, if anything. And so including people by saying you're in for a treat instead of yelling at them, which I kind of just did to you. I'm sorry. Is good. But I'm yelling at you about caring about the you haven't done this. Oh my goodness. Like, so they lived a unique path in life. That's good. That's interesting. If someone said, oh, I haven't seen Star Wars, I would go, all right, like this speed date just got interesting. What's the story there? Like, did a bunch of people bug you about it? Are you interested in it? If you're not interested in it, what pieces of media do you like? Is there something you think is really good that a lot of people haven't seen, and but you wouldn't say this thing because one, it feels shitty, and two, it is shitty. But three, because you know that people don't widely regard it as being good. That gesturing, that thing like, well, this is popular, so I can't believe you haven't done this popular thing. It's like, but it's silly to consume things just because they're popular. Like that would be a sign of me being a person without standards. Like that's not that would be to my discredit if I had done that for that reason. I don't know. Anyway, no more preaching to the choir. I hope you had as much fun as I did with this unhinged parlay where I local YouTuber bullies you into having a better life for 55 minutes. Again, if at some point you eventually play NieR Automata, I would invite you to go to that link in the description and enjoy a sort of afterward book club about the experience. But I don't think there's all that much there of value to people that didn't play that. Am I just saying that because I don't want you to spoil yourself? You could go play NieR Automata and find out. But thank you very much for listening to our request, and I hope enjoying this as well. And I hope it goes well if you have some adventures or misadventures with trying to get your folks in your life, your people, to take these recommendations or not. It's gone mostly well for me. Not perfectly, but not a big deal. It's not the most important thing ever anyway. It's just, like, why not? So, best of wishes. Folks, if you want to get your own parlay like this one, well, this was kind of a special case. But you can do that using a link I'm posting in the description of this video. I normally leave all the social links in there. In this one in particular, I also suggested that Discord link that goes to the Discord server page where you can go to the Toolshed of Links channel. The Toolshed of Links channel is what I call it, where you can find my list of games with some recommendations, just some stuff with some words from me in a big spreadsheet for things you might like to play. If you're interested in that, that is something I can provide. But in this parlay, I recommended even just like watching video design essays like mine that just have games as examples. Like, I think that's even more helpful, really. Best of wishes. Good luck out there. Talk to you soon. See you in the next one. And Mr. Food, thank you very, very much. I also just, as you could tell, really enjoyed having some creative wiggle room with this one. So, cheers.